In my last video, I reviewed the anime Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid. If you haven't seen that video, you should check that. I think it turned out pretty well. Anyways, at the end of this video, I observed the presence of a tie-in video game. Now you see, this was actually a secret technique used by us entertainers known as acting. I already known about the video game. I decided to try my best to recreate my original reaction. I bring this up because I think my original reaction was even more shocking than that. It was one late September night. I was browsing the Wikipedia page of the show to find any voice actors I recognized, to see if there were anything else I knew. Then, I noticed a tiny little section in the media tab about the video game. Upon reading it, I think I experienced more genuine disbelief than I ever have in my life. It seemed so unbelievably stupid and absurd that it couldn't possibly be true. But I checked Steam, and sure enough, it was scheduled to release in October. The game was actually released about a week before I finished my review on the show, and I bought it as soon as it came out with the full intent to review it, and now, here I am. Time to check out this absolutely bizarre game to see if it's actually any good. So, without further ado, the Dragon Maid game. Oh, by the way, I'm getting pretty close to 500 subs, and I've got some stuff playing with that, so if you want to help with that, that'd be kind of cool. Funny graphic, there we go. Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid bursts forth, 2 exclamation points, Choro-gon Breath Director's Cut is, firstly, the most unnecessarily long title for a video game I've ever seen. No game's name should ever be 11 goddamn words long, but here we are. The game is a top-down shooter of all things based on the anime of the same name. Well, the anime's name is somewhere in there. They were released in March this year on Switch and PlayStation in Japan, then August on the same consoles worldwide, and then just in October on Steam. Man, even the context of the game is a weird, confusing mess, but no matter. Let's move with the game itself and see what's in store. The very first thing I did after starting up the game was head over to the settings to see if there's an option for English audio. There isn't. Darn. Like, sure, the game is made by Japanese people for a Japanese audience based on a Japanese show and initially released only in Japan, but I still wish with an option for it, since there's a lot of spoken dialogue in the game that you just can't understand at all. Outside the options, there's really nothing much to do aside from the story mode. So let's take a gander at that. Now so I can look at some parts of the game individually, since, you know, we're actually getting into the game now. But this is the story mode, so let's start with briefly covering the story. If you can believe it, the story mode of a game based on a slice of life show is really simple. Isn't that a shocker? The story follows Kobayashi, Kana, Toru, Elma, and Lukoa, who went to visit Takio in Factory, only to get sucked into Factory's computer, and they have to traverse through his game to get out, whilst discovering why they were sucked in. Yeah, that's it. There's really not much here. The plot is so bare bones, this game doesn't give any attention to it, and the mystery of who sucked them all is so poorly hidden that it barely even counts as a mystery. Like, gee, I wonder who that feminine maniacal laughter could be coming from, in the cast of like 3 characters, all of whom are already here, except for the one who's known for doing evil stuff like this. One thing that's kind of worth mentioning is multiple endings the game has. Depending on how many dragons you have alive at the end of some stages, and how many stages you beat, you can get 5 different endings. I didn't get all of them, but I ended up getting the bad ending, and the good ending where everyone dies anyways. Multiple endings are always a fun way to spice up game's replayability and expand the story, and I do intend to go through and replay the game for those endings I missed. As for the story, oh well, it's nice to see Fafnir. Much like the show, the story mostly just serves as simple ground for character interactions. The cast of 5 have some dialogue with one another between the stages, and much like the show, it's good stuff. Quality dialogue that really captures the characters well, and it's fully voice acted too. At least in one language. There are some surprisingly good interactions between the characters in the stages too. It's not as good as the show or anything, but it's still constantly engaging. Man, I really could have used that back in my review of the show. But hey, this isn't a show, it's a game, so let's look at the gameplay, eh? MKDMBFCGBDC is a top-down shooter / bullet hell. The game's main selling point to make it stand out, aside from the licensing, is a 3-character mechanic. In the game, you control Toru, Elma, and Kana as you traverse through the levels. You control one of them at a time, but you can switch between them at any time. While one character is on field, the other 2 will passively heal. This mechanic is actually brilliant. It encourages you to use all the different characters and divide your time between them, as there are very, very few other ways to heal in the game. It also rewards you for being skillful at dodging, since it lets you stick with the characters you like for longer periods of time. The 3 aforementioned protagonists all play very differently from one another, with each character needing to approach problems in different ways. Toru is probably the simplest character. Her main attack is a straight firing projectile that does some crazy damage, with a couple of side shots that home in. This makes Toru best at shredding bosses and other enemies with lots of health, and yeah, she can make quick work of these guys. Thing is, that's kinda all Toru does. The other characters have a thing or two that makes them more unique, but Toru's just shoot. Not like that's a bad thing, it's just kinda odd. Next, Elma's meant to be a crowd control character. Her main attack is a spread shot that fires 9 shots in front of her, letting her hit enemies across the entire screen. but these shots obviously do less damage than Toru's. Now this seems like it would make Elma pretty terrible against bosses, but luckily Elma's got another trick up her sleeve. When she's fighting her main attack, she'll make these weird targets at the top of the screen, which will stay in one spot and deal constant damage to any foe who comes in contact with them. These targets can actually deal some crazy damage to bosses over time, and can make Elma more effective at killing bosses who then need to move around everywhere than Toru. Elma also has this weird feature of doing massive damage with her charge attack, but I'll get to the specifics of that later. Finally, Kana's meant to be a sort of, oh my god, what am I supposed to do now character. Her main attack is by far the weakest of the three, firing her measly 4 shots at a time compared to these. However, all 4 shots home in on foes, which gives Kana the niche of being the best at dodging while still dealing with foes. If you're being hit with an absolute onslaught of projectiles, it's typically best to just switch to Kana and keep your eyes on the bottom of the screen so you can focus 100% on dodging while letting auto aim do its work. But that isn't the only reason Kana is the best dodger. Every second or so while firing, Kana will create a small wall of feathers in front of her, which will deflect any projectiles that collide with it. Again, this just aids Kana in her dodge and pray mode, since the less they have to dodge, the more likely they are to survive. Finally, Kana's Choro-gon Breath, another thing I haven't actually talked about yet, will heal all party members a pretty good amount, including Kana herself, make it the only reliable way of fast healing. Kana's kind of more of a support character, but she's a pretty damn good support character. Now that I've looked at all the characters, I can talk about the absolute favorite part of the mechanic of character switching, the balance. The characters in this game are so insanely well balanced. There's no character who I can look at and go, yeah, she's better than this one, because they all shine in certain situations and levels, and pretty equally too. In any given level, you'll want to plan out when to switch to any of your characters to make the trek as easy as can be. I seriously don't think I've played any game where the characters are this equal. It's really refreshing, it makes it feel all the more rewarding to get good at using them all optimally. Anyways, let's look at those other mechanics I mentioned earlier, the dash and the Choro-gon Breath. When you press and hold the A button, your character will stop shooting and start charging up a charge. Releasing it will send you careening towards the nearest enemy, doing some pretty respectable damage, and more importantly, sending you clean through all projectiles on your way there. I found the dash to be most useful when you have no other way out of the corner, as you can use it to basically jump over to a nearby enemy and hopefully keep your health bar intact. And as stated earlier, Elma's dash does some colossal damage, which can even make a clear impact on a boss's health bar. The dash does have to be balanced somehow though. Anytime you use a full charge dash, your character will lose a tiny chunk of health. It's not much, but if you dash too much, it'll really start to add up, and you'll find yourself 6 feet under pretty unexpectedly. But even with that, the dash is an essential mobility tool that takes a little while to master, but it's absolutely worth the time. And on the subject of mobility tools, I'll also briefly touch on the opposite of the charge. Pressing the ZL button will see your character fly back to the bottom of the screen. It doesn't do any damage or give you any invincibility, but it'll snap you right to where you basically always want to be, right at the bottom. Just anything worth mentioning, and I will bring it up again later. Finally, the last major mechanic is in the title of the game, so you know it's important. Well, I mean, I think it's in there, I'll have to review it later. As you deal damage to enemies, you'll charge with a shiny meteor at the bottom of your screen. Every bar it fills gives you one use of Choro-gon Breath, which, when activated, will do 2 things. Firstly, it'll do some huge damage to all enemies on screen, most likely killing any non-boss or mini-boss enemies. But secondly, and much more importantly, it'll instantly remove any projectiles headed your way. This makes Choro-gon Breath the ultimate last resort get out of jail card, and learning to use it strategically is one of the most valuable things to learn in this game. You want to find the areas of stages you struggle with, and probably use it there to make your life easier. But there is another use for it, as mentioned earlier. Kana's Choro-gon Breath does far less damage to foes, at about half the other characters, but in return it restores a good chunk of health to all party members. So if you're in a really bad spot, like in the middle of a tough boss where all your characters are near death, using Kana's Choro-gon Breath might be the thing that can pull you through, and that is almost always what I use them for. Health is such a great trade-off for damage, but that's just me. Everyone will have different ways, times, and places to use Choro-gon Breath in a way that best suits them, which is why I find such a simple mechanic so interesting. So those are the fundamentals of the game. There are a surprising amount of interesting twists on the standard top-down shooter formula, and it's really fun learning how to master them all to get through the stages as well as possible. Oh yeah, I guess I should look at those next. You know how to play the game, but every game needs somewhere to play it. So, the levels. Now let me get one thing out of the way. This game is really short. There are a grand total of 5 levels, plus 1 extra for a good ending. And the levels themselves aren't extremely lengthy, with each one taking about 3 to 5 minutes if you don't die. The game can easily be completed in under half an hour if you know what you're doing, but most of the challenge and content in the game comes from mastering levels and learning how to beat them all with ease. You see, the way the main story is set up sees you head through all 6 levels back to back, with health being saved across stages. So, if someone dies, they're down for the count. You restart the given level at any time, but you'll still have all your HP from the previous stage, so you want to learn to minimize damage taken across all of them. Alright, now let's actually look at the stages. The first 3 levels can be beaten in any order you please, but for the sake of this video, I'm just going to look at them left to right. I can't recommend enough finding the best order to beat these 3 stages. always do whatever you find easiest last to get the hard stuff out of the way, and using the last and easiest stage to restore health for the harder stages later on. Anyways, the first stage is themed around a typical fantasy RPG. You'll be fighting skeletons, ballistas, goblins, and the like. This is also the easiest stage by a laughably large margin. The number of enemies and projectiles on screen at any time is minuscule compared to any other stage, even the others you have available at the start of the run, and the boss is a complete pushover. Sure, she's got some hard attacks, but again, comparatively they're nothing. And the first phase can be beaten by just hiding at the top of the screen with Kana. The second level is based on a candy aesthetic racing game that's actually in a few episodes of the show. The level is also really easy, up until the very end. For some reason, the boss's level is actually pretty damn hard. Her first phase is no problem. Tor can mow through it in mere seconds, but that second phase, oh god. The slime will shrink down, create a bunch of clones of herself, and just lob balls of projectiles around the arena. There are a lot of small things here that add to make this phase a pain to deal with. The boss is way smaller than normal, and in fact smaller than most of the bosses in this game, making her harder to directly hit. The clones will often eat your shots, which doesn't damage the boss, making the target area effectively much smaller. The projectiles will clump up in groups that cover a large fraction of the arena, which wouldn't be a problem, but the arena is much smaller than it should be due to the clones occupying way too much space. Touching the clones or the boss by accident does a really huge amount of contact damage, and since the boss tends to hover around the middle of the screen, Elmo's targets are going to be largely ineffective against the last. All these add up to make a weirdly difficult second phase of the boss, which is especially odd considering the other two phases are super unnotable. The third, first stage is based on a horror game, and sees your characters wrestling through a spooky mansion full of ghosts and pumpkins. It's standard and difficult, but in a fun, challenging manner. There's one really obnoxious part I always end up using Choro-gon Breath on, and the boss is pretty tough, especially during the third phase when she summons bird reinforcements. But it's really nothing worth talking about. The fourth stage is definitely worth talking about though. This game is inspired by other, more traditional top-down shooters, with a futuristic look and spaceships shooting at you. Anyways, this level is a significant step up in difficulty from the previous three, and it was the first stage I was stuck on for a good period of time. This is also the stage where I really realized this game is pretty dang hard. It's entirely possible I think this just because I'm new to the bullet hell genre, because it might be easy comparatively. But regardless, the game doesn't hold its punches, and this level is a perfect example of that. It's just a constant onslaught of hard to dodge patterns of projectiles with basically no breaks until the boss, who will also whoop ya. But the game is challenging in the best way. There are very few times when I got frustrated from dying. It was always more of a, dang, I died, but I'll be better this time. Dying almost always felt like it was my fault, but in the best way possible. But still, I found myself dying a lot in this level. Luckily, there's no real penalty for restarting, aside from just going back to the start level, so I was able to get through it. Well, at least on my second run. On my first playthrough, I gave up on the level because I had to rebind some buttons, and realized I never actually hit record, so I don't have any footage of my first hour in the game. Awesome! By the way, rebind the fire button to RT. It is so much easier to hold for extended periods, and you can just tape the button down if your finger gets hard, like I did. The fifth level is so bizarrely easy. Like, after the absolute onslaught of the fourth one, you expect the fifth one to be more of the same, if not even worse. But no. It's actually the second easiest level in the game, being only by that first level. It's some prehistoric thing and all, but man, compared to the fourth, it's just so remarkably unremarkable. Well, there's one thing to note, the boss. You're put against Elulu in this fight, who's the first character from the show you find in the game. And everyone knows that bosses you recognize are always the hardest ones, and Elulu is no exception. She's got some mean attack patterns that can be real tricky to dodge, and it's not uncommon to see her practically cover the entire screen in projectiles. Elulu really feels like a test to make sure you understand the mechanics of the game. Like how the first attack can be an absolute cakewalk if you know how to dash well. Very hard, very well designed, and very good boss, just tied to an extremely boring stage. And that's where the game ends, sometimes. This stage will partially determine what ending you get. If you have at least one dragon dead at the end of the stage, like I did after performing my sacrifice for the first time to get through the Elulu fight, you'll just move on to the bad ending or two. But if you have all three alive, you get to go into the super secret 6th stage and determine your ending from there. Stage 6 is actually based on the show. It would have been cool if all the stages of this TV tie-in show were based on said show, but I guess it's better than nothing. The stage is Kobayashi's imagination manifested in the computer, somehow. It's full of cool references and callbacks to Dragon Maid. Gameplay-wise, the stage is weirdly short, being a fraction of the length of the others. It's pretty densely packed, but after being stage 4 in Elulu, it's nothing one can't handle. Until the boss. The boss of the stage, and by extension the final boss of the game, is Lukoa. In the canon of the show, Lukoa is by far the most powerful dragon, having previously been a goddess and all. So, they decided to reflect that in her boss fight. Lukoa is far and away the hardest part of the game, She just lops wave after wave of screen-filling attacks with you, and each phase is worse than the last. First, you got these circles with extra projectiles, where you gotta thread the needle to just stay alive. Then you've gotta dodge these literal walls of projectiles that are easy to dodge but will absolutely get you the first few attempts. Then you gotta navigate through these massive strings of attacks and damage her enough to start phase 2. She'll hit you with an onslaught of centipedes or whatever, plus an assortment of super fast attacks that you can only reliably dodge by wiggling around in a corner as Kana. Then she'll fly around the screen doing contact damage to take out a half character's health, and then we'll do whatever this is, which requires the reflexes of a hummingbird to navigate through the walls of projectiles while still dealing damage and dodging Luku herself, who's orbiting the center of the screen. Now, if you got through all that, it's on to the third phase, and all that previous stuff was just the easy part. Luku's third phase is unique among the bosses, and it's only one attack. That's because it only needs to be one attack. You have to continuously dodge this attack while dealing a freaking huge amount of damage to her, and it's every bit as hard as it looks. And whenever you fail Luku, you have to go back through stage 6, which doesn't sound too hard, because it's not, which makes it harder. You get so focused on the comparatively difficult boss fight, you start to go brain off mode in the stage, which leaves you getting sloppy and making simple errors. Or maybe you're looking too far into this. That's possible. I kid you not when I say that over half my time spent in this game was on stage 6 solely because of this boss. I don't even have the footage of me beating her because I was running out of space for videos, so I just decided to play the game until I beat her, and then record the ending. There was a good reason that this boss fight has its own separate game mode attached to it. It's really that difficult. Speaking of difficulty, you've got plenty of options to change that in this game, with changing them also increasing your score and reward. Upon starting any mode, you can change the flat difficulty and risk rate. Difficulty is simple. The higher it is, the faster projectiles move, the more enemies there are, and the harder boss patterns are to dodge. If you want to get good, this is the way to learn. I'm pretty sure higher difficulty also equals higher score, but I'm not positive. On the flip side, risk rate will increase the health of enemies, and reward you with more treasure and memorabilia, which are two things to get to later. Now those are the easy changes to make, but there are two more things you can tinker with in your settings. You can give yourself more Choro-gon Breaths, up to 5. There's no option to lower them, so this option is kind of weird, but it's nice. And finally, you mess around with the amount of HP your character has. If you're struggling, you can give yourself a big old boost of upwards to double your HP to get through the game. Or if the game's just too easy, you can try cutting your health in half. Or if you're really just a sadistic maniac, dying in one hit in a bullet hell. Why would anyone put themselves through this? I like to see someone try to beat the entire story mode with 1% plus extreme plus risk 5. They'd go insane by the time they beat the first stage. And speaking of, there are more game modes than just the story mode. Most of them aren't really worth talking about though. There's a stage exploration, where you play the individual stages to collect the goodies I'll get to later. There's a boss rush, which is exactly what it sounds like. One notable thing is it's only the first 5 bosses up until you beat Luku for the first time, and after that you can't remove it from your selection. So after beating the story mode once, the boss rush becomes irreversibly harder. Interesting design. And finally there's the Luku challenge, the only game with any real distinction. In this mode you fight Luku in some differing ways, like she has infinite health, but it gets harder the more damage you deal. Or survival challenge where you just try to withstand attacks for as long as you can. All these modes are great ways to practice and hone your skills in the game, so you can try to do better in the story and unlock alternate endings, and get higher on the leaderboard. Oh yeah, there's also a leaderboard in this game. You can use it to see how well you compare against the other dozen people who play this game. My favorite run has gotta be the one where I ended up in 82th. Good stuff. The last couple things worth talking about are by far the best parts of the game. The collection. This section on the menu is where 99% of the licensed content will be found, and there's a lot of good stuff here. You got the standard illustrations, you know, character art, stage designs, the logos, all that sort of fun little thing. Moving up, there's profiles for every character. They have profiles for the bosses, but those aren't nearly as interesting as the characters from the show. They're filled with all sorts of information about the characters, including some great callbacks and jokes, and some stuff you just can't find in the show, like every character's height and bust, waist, hip. Oh my god, this stupid show. Dragon sizes, skills, favorite foods, so on. They're simple, fun, and charming. What's not to love? The next couple tabs are a bit different. The treasure and memory must be collected throughout the stages to be unlocked, which gives the stages that much more replayability. The treasure and memory will randomly fly from the top of the screen and drop from enemies, respectively. And if you pick them up and finish the level, they're yours to keep. Collecting these can be a really fun mini-game too. Somebody's gotta weave in and out of enemy projectiles to try to collect the collectible and then retreat to safety. This is the best use of the far aforementioned retreat to the bottom of the screen. Sometimes it's best to fly upward to get one of these, and then hitting this button is always the fastest way back to the safest area. The chance and frequency of these spawnings is increased by risk rate, so trying to get all of them is gonna require you to get pretty good at the game. Oh yeah, also memory pieces can drop at the very bottom of the screen and become impossible to collect. That's not very fun. So, what actually are these things? Well, treasures are pretty mediocre. They're just random objects that fit the theme of the stage, which means the only ones that I, and probably most other people, care about are the ones from stage 6, since that's the stage actually based on the show. The only reward for completing all of them is a Steam achievement, but they're pretty harmless. But compared to memory pieces, treasures don't hold a candle to them. More pieces are scattered bits of artwork. They're evenly distributed throughout the stage, but each art piece has all of its pieces in a single stage. You get all of them, you lock the full art piece. And if there's anything you want to see in a licensed video game, it's cool artwork of the original media, and boy does MKDMBFCGBDC deliver. There are dozens of unique art pieces to select, and I only managed to get one, but I certainly intend to go up and get them all later. And hey, they even got fully voiced interactions between characters to go along with the art. These are a great word for exploring the stage, even though there are a couple of weird ones which I've just come to expect from this franchise. They're all great, and are a fantastic way to remind you that this is, in fact, a Dragon Maid game. And last but certainly not least, is another thing you just come to expect from this franchise. Bangin' music. The soundtrack of this game is absolutely stellar for no reason. It's weird enough for the show to have a good soundtrack, but to put that much effort into a weird time game that like 10 people are gonna buy, that's commitment. The soundtrack is ridiculously short, and also pretty hard to find. I can only find a single video on YouTube with 600 views uploaded by a guy named Wearing Your Shoes in his generic profile pic, which feels weirdly poetic in a way. But the tracks are fantastic. The cutscene song captures the signature quirky feel I praised the soundtrack about back in the show. The Lukoa boss fight captures the absolute horror of the fight brilliantly, with some drummer absolutely shredding it, along with a goddamn choir of all things. And the gallery music is so amazingly catchy that I often find myself just browsing the gallery again so I could hear it. I seriously don't understand why this franchise of all things is blessed with the greatest composers on the planet, but like I said last time, you certainly won't see me complaining. And yeah, I think that just about covers everything. Overall, the game is a surprisingly enjoyable bullet hell that counts its extremely short length with tons of replay value. However, I wouldn't recommend it to everyone for one simple reason. If you're not a fan of Dragon Maid, you really aren't going to get much out of this game. A lot of the enjoyment from the game comes from seeing the characters you love interacting in a new setting, and getting to lock all the art of them. If you don't know the show, you just get some weirdly short bullet hell with meaningless collectibles, and there are far better bullet hell options on the market for probably a lower price. And on that note, the price for this game is just ridiculous. $30 for a game with 6 levels is a scam and a half. Wait until the game goes on sale. All in all, I give the game a 7 out of 10. Much more fun than I thought it'd be. I really just captured all the things I love about the show on a smaller scale. Just, please, for the love of all that's sacred, just add some English voice acting. I want to hear these lines in a language I can understand. And that concludes this miniseries. Until the 3rd season of the show comes out, or some other weird form of media releases, there's nothing else really worth talking about from this franchise. This was a fun little side trick, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. If you did, let me know in the comments below. Any old feedback is greatly appreciated, as I strive to make the best content I can. And hey, maybe consider subscribing while you're at it. It couldn't hurt, yeah? And with that said, I will see you all next time. Deuces.